From our Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. The world has experienced its hottest day ever recorded. The global average temperature reached over 62 degrees Fahrenheit or 17 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. That record was set just 24 hours after the previous record was set on Monday. Heat waves have gripped the globe in recent weeks. The World Meteorological Organization has declared the onset of El Niño conditions, which are characterized by a warming of surface waters in the Pacific Ocean. El Niño is known to increase the likelihood of extreme weather events such as heat waves, droughts, and floods. The WMO has warned that the world faces a climate emergency and urgent action is needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Executive Director of the California-based Global Climate and Health Alliance, Jenin, says people around the world are already suffering from climate impacts. She urges governments to phase out all fossil fuels and transition to renewable energy for all. Frederick Otto is a climate scientist at the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment at Imperial College London, UK. She says hitting the hottest recorded global temperature is a death sentence for humans and the ecosystem. New York City residents are baffled after swarms of tiny flying beetles in parts of Manhattan and Brooklyn hit the city. The white or green bugs get stuck into people's hair. Some experts believe they may be insects that benefit from fire. Smoke from the Canadian wildfires that has affected the city over the last few weeks may have brought them here. But others say they are aphids who suck sap from plants and that their presence is an indicator of a healthy environment. The warm weather may have triggered a mass migration of winged aphids in New York City. Scientists say the bugs aren't harmful to human beings and they do not spread disease. A federal judge has blocked a recent Florida law that imposes fines on voter registration organizations. The law was signed by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis in May. It is being challenged by several groups, including the Hispanic Federation and the American Civil Liberties Union of Florida. The legislation imposed a $50,000 fine on organizations that allow non-U.S. citizens to collect voter registration applications. It also mandated that such groups store applicant information. In a ruling released Monday, Chief District Judge Mark Walker called both of these provisions unconstitutional. He also described the law as Florida's latest attack on voting rights. Walker says it had significantly disrupted community groups' efforts to reach out to citizens. He also pointed out that the law specifically targets non-citizens, even though they are legally allowed to work in the U.S. Nelson Mandela's granddaughter is praising a U.S. Muslim women's group for promoting human rights. Angelica Mandela lauded the American Muslim and Multi-Faith Women's Empowerment Council for its work building bridges between communities and promoting tolerance. The organization focuses on empowering communities and women of different faiths through education and advocacy. In one of its most successful national campaigns in 2016, it educated more than 1,000 women about their legal rights. Mandela stressed the importance of women of all faiths supporting each other and fighting for religious freedom. Mandela is a social activist who leads a rural development organization in South Africa. Israeli forces have left a trail of devastation in the Palestinian West Bank city of Jenin. The Israeli incursions stopped Wednesday. 12 Palestinians were killed and more than 140 injured. Dozens of homes, vehicles, stores, and utility lines were destroyed. Palestinian residents say Israeli forces targeted civilians, not gunmen. Speaking to Turkey's Anadolu news agency, a resident says Israeli forces destroyed his home. Another resident says it looked as if an earthquake had hit Jenin, as everything was in ruins. Jamil Talib says his car had been smashed by Israeli bulldozers and his house has been turned into a shack. Aliyah al-Bali claims Israeli soldiers stole her jewelry. The Israeli raid was condemned by several countries, including Turkey, Jordan, Egypt, Indonesia, and Pakistan. The United Nations has called for an independent investigation into the attack. Experts say the shooting of a 17-year-old by police in a Paris suburb and subsequent protests raised concerns about institutional racism in France. The teenager, Nahel, was of Algerian and Moroccan descent. Salman Sayed is a professor at the College of Leeds in the UK. He says the shooting was a sign of institutional Islamophobia and racism in France's criminal justice system. Sayed calls it dangerous not only for Muslims, but for society itself, as the erosion of civil rights will affect everyone. He stresses that fighting Islamophobia is essential to protect people's rights. The UN calls on the Taliban to overturn its decision to close beauty salons. Details after the break, so stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back. The UN is calling on the Taliban to not implement its recent order to close beauty salons. UN official Farhan Haq told Turkey's Anadolu news agency the restrictions will have a negative impact on the Afghan economy. Haq says the UN mission remains in contact with the Taliban to seek a reversal of the decree. The Taliban has set a one-month deadline to close beauty salons. Critics say Taliban rulers have engaged in a sustained assault on human rights and women's rights, despite their pledges to protect them. Last April, they banned Afghan women from working with NGOs. Women and girls have been stripped of their rights under the Taliban, including education, and have been excluded from public life. Thousands of women have since lost their jobs or been forced to resign from government institutions and the private sector. The Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan in August 2021, following the collapse of the US-backed Ashraf Ghani government. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation is calling for the use of art and media to combat Islamophobia. A meeting of the group's broadcasting union stressed the need to improve understanding of the use of freedom of expression in the media. Wahid Ali Sindi, Director of Information for OIC, says its 57 member countries have been urged to promote more arts and media events. He says the goal is to highlight Islamic principles which call for coexistence, tolerance, and respect for others. The meeting was called to discuss the desecration of religious shrines in the media following the burning of the Quran in Sweden last week. Cindy says the OIC is working to establish national mechanisms to hold accountable those media outlets that continue to spread hate speech and intolerance. He also announced the implementation of the OIC media strategy to combat Islamophobia. An independent fact-finding mission says Iranian authorities must end the crackdown on protesters. Its mandate is from the UN Human Rights Council. The group is calling on Tehran to end executions, mass arrests, and detentions. Protests erupted in Iran in September 2022 after 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was arrested by the country's morality police. She later died in police custody. Sarah Hussein, who led the UN mission, said the domestic investigation into Amini's death had not met standards. No official data on those arrested, detained, charged, or convicted in connection with the protests is publicly available. The fact-finding mission says at least 26 people had been sentenced to death in connection with the protests. Dozens more have been indicted or face crimes punishable by death. At least 7 men have been executed. The mission says it has sent 7 letters to the Iranian government asking permission to visit the country. So far, they have received no response. A European investigation has led to the arrest of 15 people accused of smuggling people from Syria to EU countries. The network used an unusually long and expensive route to smuggle migrants into Europe. From Syria, the migrants were headed either to Sudan, the United Arab Emirates, or Libya. They were then smuggled to Algeria and finally asked to cross the Mediterranean Sea to end up in Spain. Europol, the European Union's law enforcement agency, says this criminal network has extensive infrastructure in countries along the route. It says the latest investigation found that the suspects charged migrants between $7,000 and $20,000 per person for their smuggling to Europe. Authorities from Spain, Germany, and Norway have joined the investigation. The suspects are believed to have organized the smuggling of at least 200 people. After 4 years in limbo, the Indian Supreme Court has announced it will hear petitions against the annexation of the Muslim-majority state of Jammu and Kashmir. In August 2019, India had suspended a constitutional provision that guaranteed Kashmir special status and its own citizenship rights. It also divided the state into 2 centrally administered areas. Next week, a 5-member constitution bench of the Supreme Court will hear a series of petitions challenging the revocation of special status. The petitioners claim the Indian government's move was unilateral and did not have the consent of the people or the local assembly. The petitions had been waiting for 4 years to be added to the list. Local political parties have welcomed the decision. Former Chief Minister Mehbooba Mufti says she hopes justice would be done for the people. Clashes have broken out between African immigrants and locals in Sfax, Tunisia's second-largest industrial city. Violent incidents were reported between the communities following a fight between a black African and a local that left 1 person dead. Eyewitnesses saw black Africans leaving the city to seek safety. 3 men from Cameroon were arrested for the murder, and more than 30 others were arrested for illegal entry. Many migrants were rounded up and taken to the militarized border with Libya. Experts say President Kais Saied's speech in February, in which he blamed African immigrants for violence, has aggravated the situation. They say concerns about food shortages, economic decline, and unemployment are fueling distrust of migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. Locals say the immigrants are eating up their resources, but some Tunisians see the migrants as potential clients for whom they arrange boat trips to Europe. Speaker of Parliament Brahim Bouderbala called on Said to intervene and take immediate measures to calm the situation in Sfax. At least 17 people, including 3 children, have died after a toxic gas leak in South Africa. The gas leaked from a cylinder in an informal settlement near the city of Johannesburg. Authorities say the leak appears to be linked to illegal mining activities. Search and rescue efforts are ongoing and the death toll is expected to rise. Police say the 3 children killed were 1, 6, and 15 years old. Authorities suspect the gas cylinder was used by illegal miners to process gold. Illegal gold mining is a major problem in South Africa and often associated with violence and death. Before we end today's news, I'd like to make a special request. It takes our team a combined 55 hours of work daily to produce this news for you. It is news with a unique perspective, and you will find it only here. Sound Vision Foundation is the non-profit organization which produces it, and like PBS and NPR, it depends on your donations. Please visit MuslimNetwork.tv to donate now, or click on the link below to donate. Thank you. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon for the latest updates. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit MuslimNetwork.tv. Salam and good night.